Good evening and welcome to WANA Live, the reading series of the Writers Association of Northern Appalachia. I'm your host, Damian Dressick, and this is your other host,
Christina Fasonic. How are you, Damian?
I'm doing well. It's been a beautiful day. Trying to get some sort of business of writing stuff done. Enjoying the weather. Getting the odd end of the semester student email.
I was going to say detritus.
I'm not saying. How are you? How is the world of Wheeling tonight? Well, Christina, one of us is having some sort of audio difficulties. I'm unsure if it's you or it's me.
Is it fixed?
It seems better.
Better?
Somewhat better.
Okay. Yes, I don't know what the bug is, but I think it's out, right?
It's imperfect.
Oh, we're imperfect.
You're frozen, actually.
I'm what?
You're frozen.
Oh no, you can hear me, but I'm frozen?
Well, you seem to be moving again now. I have a plan, Christina. Before the universe attacks you again, please tell the folks at home about tonight's terrific reader.
Yes, can you hear me?
We can hear you now.
So tonight, Joseph for us, he is the former poet laureate of North Carolina from 2012 to 2014, recipient of the 2016 North Carolina Award for Literature. He is the author of books of poetry, including this medal, nominated for the National Book Award, and winner of the Oscar Arnold Young Award, along with a number of other books, including Restoring Sacred Heart, winner of the 2010 Roanoke Chowan Prize, awarded annually by the North Carolina Literary and Historical Association for Best Book of Poetry in a given year. Half of What I Say Is Meaningless, which is a fantastic title, is the winner of the 2014 Will D. Campbell Award for Creative Nonfiction. His novel, The Life of the World to Come, was released from the University of South Carolina Press in 2014. A new volume of poems, Light at the Seam, from Louisiana State University Press, was released in spring of 2022, which is a book he is going to read from tonight. He is a professor.
Well, I think we're going to bring Joseph on and let him speak for himself. Good evening, Joseph. How are you?
Good evening, folks. Yeah, thanks very much for having me on, and thanks so much, Christina, for that really terrific introduction. I have a new book of poems out. It's called Light at the Seam. It's from LSU Press, and it digs in very deeply on mountaintop removal and is set in the southeastern part of the United States, although a lot of the poems are set in North Carolina. But it tackles mountaintop removal in the southern Appalachians, among other things. But it also has that reach into northern Appalachia. There are a number of poems that also mention states that are not typically considered the southern Appalachians. So I'm going to read two poems. I'm going to read the title poem, which is called Light at the Seam, and then I'll read a longer poem.
All right, so we're going to disappear and let you get to it.
And again, this poem is called Light at the Seam. And most of these poems are acrostic. The inspiration of them comes from Carl Gailey, his fantastic photographs on mountaintop removal. He documented that practice over a course of a couple years and produced an exhibit called Lost on the Road to Oblivion, The Vanishing Beauty of Coal Country. Light at the Seam. This is the afterlife. threshold of oblivion, a blacktop crest on Pine Mountain, Bell County, Kentucky, U.S. Route 119 burning north through the heart of coal until it plays out frozen in Du Bois, PA. Out of gauzy lavender fog, the wakened sun swoons in white robes, Jesus flanked by Moses and Elijah transfigured up into a high mountain, apart, deep within, miners suspire, shake light at the seam. I think it's worth mentioning too that Carl grew up in Uniontown, PA. His dad was a coal miner. I grew up in Pittsburgh. My dad was a steel worker, and we know that coal and steel, are Siamese twins, if you will. These poems in this book are all poems of witness. They're very political. They indict corporations, but they do not indict coal miners. I see coal miners a little bit like I see steel workers, folks who had to suffer the depravity of robber barons in order to put food on the table for their children. And these poems are not just about the coal miners, but they're about their families too. And they're also about the land. The land that mountaintop removal literally evicts the people who have lived there for all of their lives, generations and generations back. This next poem, this is the last one I'll read because it's kind of long. It's called The Coal Miner's Wife, a Letter. And it's after Ezra Pound's adaptation from the Chinese of Li Po's The River Merchant's Wife, a Letter. That poem is kind of a famous poem that's not anthologized as much as it was when I first started teaching years and years ago, but it's a poem that I love to teach. And it occurred to me that I wanted to adapt that poem into a modern version. Again, The Coal Miner's Wife, a Letter. And it starts with an epigraph from Li Po. Southern women have alabaster skin. We were from the same town, Cowan, along the gully, Webster County, church twice of Sunday, Wednesday evening prayer meeting. I swore to every whit of it. Hair chopped in bangs across my brow. I played in moonflowers and bleeding hearts, subterranean, even as a boy, feats were nothing to you. You crawled the culvert pipe to save blind Ruby's kitten, one eye blue, the other mahogany. Its affliction was deafness, plague of the white feline. It could not hear thunder. Rain unfolded from the sky, another flood coming on. My father, as yours, deep in the pit. My mother, silent as plums. What happened to that kitten? Blind Ruby's trailer ripped loose when the branch leapt its bank. Sycamores bent over the eddies. You whispered in my ear before that sentence, there had been nobody. At 14, we married. As foretold, you went to the mines, left Sundays, the scullery salt box with your pail, and drove off for wages underground in Fayette County. Never you pressed me, never I shied, nor from the rag to scrub the back, what you could not reach when after years in the pit, hunched, you could only so far lift your arms. 5 months now, I have not seen you, save your smudged letters, your endearments in smoke, my darling, coyotes weep from the cliffs above the gully's white water. I plant every genus of dahlias, emerald moss at the door sill. It is September 3rd, the anniversary of my father's death in Elkins coalfield. 7 years now. Billings Meadow has not been threshed. The buckeyes refuse to fall. Queen Anne's lace prospers, butterfly bushes, grand as pipe organs. Yesterday on Agnes Ridge, I saw an albino woolly worm, auguring snow or manna one. Let me know you're coming. I will trek out to meet you as far as Camden on Gully. Thanks.
Thank you, Joseph. That was wonderful
Oh,
work.
my pleasure.
I love what you were saying, the sort of preamble. I think it's so important, this idea of indicting an industry, but not the actual workers in the industry. And I don't know. Bonnie Proudfoot's one of our friends, and she, her novel Goshen Road. I think
Sure.
it's like that same sort of thing that I think that if people could understand, that's part of what we're trying to do as writers from this region, where we're celebrating its people, its workers, but calling out these sort of faceless corporations, or going back a bit, these robber barons, and the way their outsized influence is shaping the region. So I love what you're saying there. I love the way you articulate, within the poem, the idea of someone as being endurance and smoke. It's lovely.
Yeah, I mean, we have to make that distinction. I mean, here in North Carolina, we had to make that same distinction with folks who worked tobacco, for goodness sakes. Okay, it's a deadly industry, but those aren't deadly people. It's deadly because all of the reasons why steel and coal and other kinds of industries are deadly, but the people who work in it are, they're my father and your father and my mother and your mother. And we have to realize that. We also make that distinction, hopefully, when it comes to war. We despise war and aggression, but we don't despise the soldiers who fight in the war. And I've done a lot of work with returning combat veterans. So it's really important that they know that I venerate them in their service, even while I can be absolutely unequivocally against war.
Yeah. I'd actually written a note about that. How do you balance that respect for the worker with disdain for the companies that are doing so much damage? And, we talked about this the other day, that what's happening in the North, especially throughout Northern Appalachia, of course, is fracking. And
Right.
it is the Northern version now of strip mining. And how do you deal with this destruction of the land, when you come around a turn on a country road that you've known your whole life, and now instead of a green hill, there's a fracking station there. There's a well there. How do you make that, if not through literature, how do you cope with it? Because I haven't found any other way than through writing and reading.
Yeah, I mean, I think that literature is a way, witnessing, giving permission for other people to tell their stories too. Something that's important is that the people being exploited, they know they're being exploited. It's not as if they've bought into the corporate greed, that they know the disparity in wealth and that they're being used, etc. My father, who was a fierce unionist, although a gentle man, he and his cronies, they were out on strike all the time. They knew exactly what was going on. They were holding out for that. But I should mention, too, that some of us have the luxury to mouth off and quit our jobs and raise hell about the corporations. But there are so many people that really have to remain muzzled, because the consequences for them are that their kids don't eat. There's not milk and bread on the table. And that's really the insidious underbelly of that kind of corporate vice grip that working class folks are kept in. They have to keep their job. They have to eat a certain amount of crap, in order to just keep going. And I think we don't realize that. I mean, again, we're university professors, so that there's an enormous amount of privilege that goes with that. Not to say that we don't work terribly hard, but we don't work in the same way that those people work, and they remain invisible too. I mean, Lordy, coal miners are literally invisible. They are subterranean. They are in the earth. They are of the earth. It's very easy to ignore those kinds of depredations. We drive by them and never think about it until you enter, or Christine, until you start reading the literature, until you get that literature of witness. I'm hoping my book is that kind of book. Certainly, Ann Pancake's book, Strange as This Weather Has Been, those are real people. Those are not fabrications. And I think when we walk a little bit in those footprints and when we hear those voices and we understand that those are lived lives, not to mention very real things like disease that comes from all of these industries. Certainly Andrew Carnegie gave us libraries and was quite the philanthropist too, but he also gave us child labor, and just horrifying kinds of conditions. So it's important that we raise Cain about it. Witness the national discussion about minimum wage. People cannot live on a minimum wage. 2 people in a household, it's still below the poverty level. So in the food insecurity, everything, all of these social ills are linked.
Very much so, yeah.
Well, I think too that a couple of points. One, the coal industry is not coming back in West Virginia, and yet many of our young people are doing non-union mining jobs, waiting for the big paycheck that later day miners were making before all the money was under, and it's not going to happen. And so they're working in conditions that are no longer safe because there aren't standards like there were when these were union mines, and that it's not going to happen, and they keep waiting for it. So I feel like as savvy as some people are in understanding this, there's still a lot of things that people aren't being told, and you can't blame people for waiting for a good job. They're willing to work their asses off for this,
of course.
And yet it's not going to happen. But then you've got the added complication that West Virginia is now a right to work state.
Right.
So how can you go out and mouth off about the working conditions? The fact that so many of these young miners get respiratory diseases that aren't black lung, but that are cancers from the stuff that's in the mines that they're spraying on to keep the mine dust down. They don't have that option. And so I think that there's so many different things that are at play in what's happening in modern day extractive industries that miners even 20 years ago, 30 years ago could never have expected.
No, I totally agree too. And in that illusion that coal will come back is propped up by the corporations, and it won't. No one's going to, venture capitalists will not invest in coal at this point. It's just not going to happen. And you mentioned too, Christina, the good money that could be made too. Outrageous money was being made by steel workers, towards the end of its tenure. And once those claws are in a young man or woman, it's hard for them to step away from that money. But it's also certain death. Few escape without just their bodies being a travesty. We know all that.
Like my dad has arthritis in his spine from working in the steel mill, and it's a matter of time before he needs a wheelchair because of how hard the conditions were.
Absolutely.
And now we're seeing it with fracking, and the hazards are different, but they're the same, right? The consequences of all of this are the same. Destroyed land that just isn't coming back. And now the pay is quite a bit different because there's different levels for different companies. And then people think they're selling their land and they're going to get rich. And then they get the $2.04 paycheck from the gas and oil industry. And it's not, it's the same old story, just in a different time.
Yeah, absolutely. And in the environmental footprint of it is so devastating and so disastrous too. Just the notion that mountaintop removal, people who were living in certain places looked up at the peak, and that as the mountain was removed, they were actually looking down on what they had once looked up at. So and also that we now have just the technology to essentially rearrange every molecule on the planet at will,
Yeah.
And of course, mountaintop removal, I don't have to tell you all this, is, you literally shave the top of the mountain off and scoop the coal and keep shaving until all the coal's gone, but all the mountain's gone too. But then there's the slurry ponds and the sludge, the erosion. Yeah.
And yet, where's the money? It's not in our pockets. I can tell you that much.
No, not at all. Not at all. And we have a devastated wilderness too. So, and it's no accident that these things happen in certain states where certain people don't have quite the voices that maybe other folks have, nor the capital, and often their politicians have absolutely betrayed them.
Boy, I know. Yeah.
Very much so. Patricia Threshardt says, "Thank you for bearing witness to the travesty of mountaintop mining with such powerful storytelling."
Thank you, Patricia. That's really kind of you. And thank you for being here.
Now, Joseph, would you be able to show folks at home this new book?
Yeah, absolutely.
We saw it with a lovely cover.
Yeah, here it is. It's the cover image is basically the poem I read called Limbo. It's in Kentucky. It's Bell County. It is the sun kind of coming up over a roadbed. This isn't showing it off to its advantage, but it's Carl Gailey's image. It's really a really beautiful book. It's kind of, I don't know, I guess it's lavender, pinkish. So
that is hard to tell from here.
Yeah, I thought it was black and white. So this is light at the seam. People can buy this at, let's see, where can they buy this? They
can order it anywhere. They can buy it directly from LSU Press.
Okay.
Just Google me and LSU Press, and all of the purchasing information will pop up.
Well, we love supporting university and small presses.
Before we go,
they're not going to be around.
To interrupt, Damien, but before we go, I need to tell you that your student Donna has said beautiful work. I know you know Donna.
I do know Donna, who produces beautiful work herself. So
yes,
thank you, Donna.
She worked with us a long time with WANA, so we were covered. So thank you so much for being on. Before we go, though, I want to remind everybody that this Saturday in Pittsburgh, it's the Pittsburgh Festival of Books, Greater Pittsburgh Festival of Books. And at 3:30, I will be interviewing Jennifer Haig about her latest book, Mercy Street. So please plan to join us. All the information is on the website for the Greater Pittsburgh Festival of Books. It is going to be a fantastic day. So many vendors, readers, writers, everybody's going to be there. So if you're in the area on Saturday, try to drop in.
Where are you interviewing her, Christina?
It's at Schuler Theater.
Shore Theater. Oh, and one other final thing. I'd like to, on the behalf of WANA and Appalachian Lit, the Journal, thank Joseph for kindly submitting his work.
Oh, you're welcome.
Appalachian Lit, we're really happy to have you in our inaugural issue. So if you like what you heard this evening, please check out Joseph's 2 wonderful poems in our first issue of Appalachian Lit. Thanks, everybody, and we'll see you all next week.
Bye, everyone. Thanks for having me.